Captain Marcus Chen had been many things in his 32 years of life. A soldier, a diplomat, a survivor, but he had never expected to be standing in the grand throne room of the Zalarian Empire, surrounded by beings whose very existence challenged everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. The crystalline walls of the palace rose impossibly high, catching and refracting the light from 3 different suns that painted the sky in shades of amber and violet. Marcus kept his breathing steady, his hands clasped behind his back in a parade rest position that had become second nature during his years in the Earth Defense Corps. The weight of his dress uniform felt familiar and comforting, even here, millions of light years from home. The Zalarians were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in scales that shifted color with their emotions like living opals. Their elongated skulls housed brains capable of processing information at speeds that made human computers look like stone tablets. Most intimidating of all were their eyes. Large, multifaceted orbs that could perceive across spectrums of light that humans couldn't even imagine. Empress Cathara sat upon her throne, a massive construct carved from a single piece of what appeared to be living crystal. The material pulsed with an inner light that seemed to respond to her thoughts. Her scales currently displayed deep purples and blues. What Marcus had learned indicated careful consideration mixed with wariness. Around her, the court officials maintained their own careful color displays, a complex language of emotion and intention that Marcus was only beginning to understand. The reason for his presence here was both simple and impossible to believe. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Zalarian Empire. Not through radio signals or chance encounters in space, but because Earth had unknowingly settled on the edge of Zalarian territory. What followed was a tense series of negotiations that could have easily ended in the extinction of the human race. The Zalarians possessed technology that made human achievements look primitive. They traveled between stars as easily as humans crossed oceans. Their weapons could crack planets. Their shields could turn aside the light of suns. When they discovered that these newcomers, these humans, had established colonies on 3 worlds that the Empire considered theirs by ancient right, the situation became explosive. Marcus had been part of the diplomatic team sent to negotiate humanity's survival. He had expected to be arguing over territory, resources, maybe prisoner exchanges. He had not expected to become the center of an imperial succession crisis. Princess Lyrale entered the throne room with a grace that seemed to defy physics. She was younger than most of the court, perhaps equivalent to a human in her early 20s, though Marcus knew that Zalarian aging worked differently. Her scales held a pattern he had never seen before, silver and gold that seemed to move like liquid metal across her skin. When she looked at him, her multifaceted eyes caught the light in ways that made his breath catch. From the moment they had first met 3 weeks ago, something had changed. Marcus couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words that made sense even to himself. The princess had been assigned as his cultural liaison, meant to help him understand Zalarian customs and protocols. What had developed between them went far beyond professional courtesy. They had spent hours walking through the palace gardens, where plants from 100 different worlds created a tapestry of impossible beauty. She had shown him the singing crystals that grew in perfect mathematical harmonies, had taught him to read the color language of her people, had shared stories of the Empire's long history among the stars. In return, Marcus had told her about Earth, about oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, about forests where trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky, about cities where millions of humans lived and worked and dreamed together. He had shown her pictures of sunsets over wheat fields, of snow falling on mountain peaks, of children playing in parks where flowers bloomed in simple, beautiful chaos. But more than that, he had shown her something that Zalarian culture had long forgotten: the concept of choice in matters of the heart. Zalarian marriages, especially among the nobility, were matters of political alliance and genetic compatibility. Love, as humans understood it, was considered a pleasant but ultimately irrelevant emotion. Marriages were arranged by families, approved by councils, sealed by ceremony and law. The idea that someone might choose their own mate based on feelings rather than logic was not just foreign to them, it was revolutionary. Princess Lyralay had listened to Marcus's stories of human courtship and marriage with the fascination of someone discovering a new form of mathematics. The notion that two people might find each other across a crowded room and know instantly and without reason that they belonged together. It was poetry to her scientific mind. Now, as the court assembled for what was supposedly a routine diplomatic session, Marcus could see the tension in the air like a physical presence. The princess had been unusually quiet that morning, her scales showing patterns he couldn't read. The Empress had summoned not just the usual diplomatic advisors, but the full royal court. Something was about to happen. Lord Chancellor Vorthak, an ancient Zalarian whose scales had long since faded to the gray of extreme age, stepped forward with a scroll that glowed with official seals. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries of tradition. By the ancient laws of succession, Princess Lyralay, as the crown heir, must choose her mate before the completion of her 25th cycle. The court has prepared a selection of suitable candidates from the noble houses of the empire. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had known this day would come, had known that whatever was developing between him and the princess existed in a bubble that political reality would eventually burst. But hearing it spoken aloud in the formal language of imperial decree made it suddenly horribly real. One by one, the candidates were presented. Lord Zephron of the House of Crystal Sands, whose family controlled the mining rights to 3-star systems. Duke Morpheus of the Void Touched, whose fleet commanded the respect and fear of a dozen species. Prince Callian of the Solar Dynasty, whose bloodline was considered the purest in the empire outside of the royal family itself. Each candidate stepped forward, displayed their credentials, their achievements, their genetic compatibility ratings with the princess. Each was magnificent in their own way, powerful, accomplished, perfectly suited for the role of future emperor. Each represented an alliance that would strengthen the empire's position in the galaxy. Marcus watched it all with the detached fascination of someone witnessing their own execution. This was how the universe worked. This was reality. A human soldier, no matter how brave or clever or determined, could not compete with the combined weight of galactic politics and thousands of years of tradition. Princess Lyralay stood silent through the presentations, her scales showing the neutral gray-blue of formal ceremony. She listened to each candidate with the same polite attention, asked the same ritual questions about their intentions and capabilities. To the court, she appeared to be carefully considering her options with the rational deliberation expected of a future ruler. Only Marcus could see the tiny variations in her color patterns, the slight tensing of her shoulders that betrayed her inner turmoil. He had learned to read her emotions in ways that even her own people might miss. And what he saw there was a war between duty and desire, between the weight of expectation and the pull of something entirely new. When the last candidate finished his presentation, Empress Kithara rose from her throne. The crystal beneath her feet pulsed brighter, responding to her elevated emotional state. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the vast throne room with perfect clarity. The candidates have been presented according to law and custom. Princess Lyralay, the choice is yours to make. Speak now, and let your decision be recorded in the annals of the Empire. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of the entire court upon them all. The princess stood motionless for a long moment, her scales shifting through patterns of color too rapid and complex for him to follow. Then she turned. Not toward the assembled candidates with their ancient bloodlines and vast resources. Not toward her mother on the crystal throne, waiting for the politically advantageous choice that would strengthen the Empire's future. She turned toward Marcus. Their eyes met across the vast space of the throne room, and in that moment, the universe seemed to contract to just the two of them. He saw in her multifaceted gaze all the conversations they had shared, all the moments of connection that had grown between two beings from different worlds. He saw recognition, determination, and something that might have been love. Princess Lyrelay raised her arm, extending one scaled finger in a gesture that was unmistakably clear to every being in the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and strong, carrying across the silence like a declaration of war against the very foundations of reality. Mother, I choose him. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Gasps and shouts of outrage from the noble candidates, cries of disbelief from the assembled court, the sound of ceremonial weapons being drawn by guards who weren't quite sure what they were supposed to be guarding against. Through it all, Empress Cathara remained perfectly still on her throne, her scales cycling through colors so rapidly they became a blur. Her large eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under analysis. The princess walked toward him with that same impossible grace, her scales now showing the deep, rich blues and greens of absolute certainty. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see his own reflection multiplied across the facets of her eyes. "You understand what this means?" she asked quietly, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood anything anymore. "It means we're about to find out if the universe has a sense of humor." For the first time since entering the throne room, Princess Lyrelay smiled. It was an expression that didn't translate perfectly across species, but the warmth behind it was universal. "Marcus Chen of Earth," she said, her voice now raised for all to hear. "Will you accept the bond of mate choice with Princess Lyrelay of the Zalarian Empire?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to reality itself. A human and a Zalarian, a soldier and a princess. Two beings from different worlds, different species, different ways of understanding existence itself. The rational part of Marcus's mind cataloged all the reasons this was impossible, all the ways it could go wrong, all the complications that would follow. Instead, he looked into her eyes and found his answer in the certainty he saw there. "I accept." The throne room erupted again, but this time Marcus was ready for it. He had made his choice, and he could live with the consequences. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Empress Cathara rose from her throne, her massive form towering over the assembled court. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had ruled an empire spanning 1,000 worlds. "So be it. Let the choice be recorded. Princess Lyrelay has selected her mate according to law and custom. The human Marcus Chen is hereby recognized as Prince Consort-elect of the Zalarian Empire." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Prince Consort. Him. A man who had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Neo-Singapore, who had learned to fight in the streets before he learned to fight in space, who had never owned anything more valuable than his service pistol and a collection of old books. But as he looked around the throne room, at the faces of beings whose technology could reshape worlds, he realized that something fundamental had just changed. Not just for him, not just for the princess, but for the relationship between their two species. The Zalarians had just accepted a human as a member of their royal family. Whether they realized it or not, They had just acknowledged that humanity deserved a place at the table of galactic civilization. It was, Marcus reflected, either the beginning of a beautiful friendship or the start of the most spectacular diplomatic disaster in the history of two worlds. Possibly both. The weeks following Princess Lyraleigh's declaration had been unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. The palace, which had once seemed like a magnificent but alien museum, had become a battlefield where every conversation was a potential diplomatic incident, and every shared meal was an exercise in cultural navigation. The noble houses of the empire had not taken the princess's choice well. Lord Zephyrin had formally challenged the legitimacy of cross-species bonding, citing genetic incompatibility and questioning whether human emotions could be trusted in matters of imperial succession. Duke Morpheus had gone further, suggesting that the human was some kind of spy or saboteur sent to weaken the empire from within. Prince Callian, perhaps the most dangerous of the rejected suitors, had simply smiled and said he would wait to see how long this interesting experiment would last. Marcus found himself navigating a web of protocol and politics that made military strategy look simple by comparison. There were formal dinners where the wrong gesture could insult a trade alliance spanning 50 systems. There were cultural exchanges where his attempts to explain human customs were met with everything from fascination to barely concealed horror. There were endless meetings with advisors who spoke in metaphors that required translation even when they were speaking standard galactic. Through it all, Lyralai remained his anchor point, the one constant in a universe that seemed determined to test every assumption he had ever held about reality. Their relationship, which had begun as curiosity and grown into something deeper, was now being scrutinized by beings whose understanding of love was entirely theoretical. The princess had insisted on teaching him the formal protocols of Zalarian courtship, sessions that took place in her private chambers overlooking the Crystal Gardens. These lessons had become the highlight of his days, not because he enjoyed memorizing the 17 different ritual greetings required for various ranks of nobility, but because they gave him time alone with her. "You're improving," she said one afternoon, watching him practice the ceremonial bow used when greeting the Empress. "Your posture is almost correct." Marcus straightened, feeling the familiar ache in his back from the unnatural position. "Almost." Lyralae stepped closer, her scales shifting to the warm golds that he had learned indicated amusement. "You're still thinking like a soldier. Rigid, controlled. Zalarian formal movement is more like flowing water. Like this." She demonstrated the bow, her body moving with a grace that seemed to defy anatomy. When she rose, the motion was so smooth it looked like she was floating. Marcus tried to copy her, failed spectacularly, and ended up nearly falling over. "You know," he said, steadying himself against a crystal pillar, "where I come from, we have a saying about teaching old dogs new tricks." "You're not that old," Lyralae replied, "and you're certainly not a dog, though I admit I'm curious about these earth animals you keep referencing." Marcus found himself smiling. These moments, when the princess let her formal mask slip and showed simple curiosity about his world, were precious beyond measure. Dogs are companions, loyal, intelligent, brave. They choose their human families and protect them without question. "Ah," Lyralae said, her scales brightening. "Like humans choose their mates?" "Exactly like that." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the chamber's communication system. Lyralae's personal aide, a young Zalarian named Thys, appeared on the holographic display. His scales showed the deep purples of urgent news. "Your Highness, forgive the interruption. The Empress requests your immediate presence in the council chamber. There has been a development." The formal way Thys avoided looking directly at Marcus suggested that whatever the development was, it concerned him specifically. Lyra Lay's scales immediately shifted to the worried grays of concern. "Both of us?" she asked. The Empress was specific in her instructions. Prince Consort Marcus is requested to attend as well. Marcus felt that familiar cold weight in his stomach. In his experience, being specifically requested for urgent meetings rarely led to good news. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less impressive. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing star charts, trade routes, and military positions across the Empire. Around the central table sat the Empire's highest-ranking officials, their scales displaying a rainbow of concern, anger, and calculation. Empress Kithara stood at the head of the table, her massive form radiating the kind of controlled authority that Marcus had learned to respect and fear in equal measure. When they entered, her multifaceted eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like he was being scanned down to the molecular level. "Sit," she said simply. "Both of you." 2 chairs had been prepared at the table, a traditional Zellarian sitting platform for the princess and a modified human chair for Marcus. The fact that they had bothered to accommodate his different physiology was either a good sign or a very bad one. Chancellor Vorthak stepped forward, carrying a data crystal that glowed with the harsh red light of priority communications. "Your Imperial Majesty, we have received reports from our border monitoring stations. 3 human vessels have entered Zellarian space without authorization. They are requesting immediate audience with—" He paused, his scales showing distaste. "Prince Consort Marcus." Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The weight of their attention was almost physical, pressing down on him like the gravity of a heavy world. "Human vessels? What kind of ships?" "Military configuration," Admiral Korath spoke from across the table. Her scales showed the aggressive reds of someone preparing for battle. "Earth Defense Corps markings, heavily armed and moving in formation." The implications hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Earth had sent warships into Zellarian space. Given the vast technological disparity between the 2 civilizations, it was either a rescue mission or a suicide mission. Possibly both. "Do we know their intentions?" Lyra Lay asked, her voice carefully controlled. "They are broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies," Chancellor Vorthak replied. "The message is brief. Requesting immediate extraction of Captain Marcus Chen and all human personnel. Response required within standard diplomatic time frame." Marcus closed his eyes, running rapid calculations in his head. Standard diplomatic time frame was 48 hours. His promotion to Prince Consort would have been reported back to Earth through the original diplomatic channels. From Earth's perspective, one of their officers had been captured or coerced into an impossible political situation. The natural response would be a rescue mission. "They think you're being held against your will," Lyra Lay said quietly, reading his expression with the accuracy that came from their growing bond. "Worse than that," Marcus replied. "They think I've been compromised. From a military perspective, the idea that I would voluntarily join the royal family of a hostile alien empire is impossible to believe." Empress Kithara leaned forward, her claws clicking against the crystal surface of the table. "And what do you believe, Prince Consort? Are you being held against your will?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked around the table at the assembled leaders of an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. These beings could destroy Earth with a thought, could erase humanity from existence without breaking stride in their larger political games. By any rational measure, he was a prisoner here, a pawn in galactic politics beyond his comprehension. But when he looked at Lyra Lee, saw the genuine concern in her shifting scales, remembered the conversations they had shared, and the connection that had grown between them, he knew his answer. "No," he said firmly. "I'm here by choice." "Choice," Admiral Korath repeated, her scales showing skepticism. A choice made under what circumstances? Surrounded by forces you cannot resist, offered a position you cannot refuse, bonded to a princess whose rejection could mean war for your species? Marcus had to admit she had a point. From the outside, his situation probably did look like coercion dressed up as romance. How could he explain that what he felt for Lyrelay was real? How could he convince them that his decision to accept the bond was made freely, not under duress? "With respect, Admiral," he said, "choice isn't about circumstances. It's about what you do when faced with options. I could have said no. I could have found ways to refuse or delay or negotiate. I chose to say yes because I wanted to." "Wanted to," Chancellor Vorthak mused, his ancient scales showing the deep blues of contemplation. "Human emotional responses are difficult for us to understand. This concept of love that you and the princess speak of, it seems to override rational consideration of consequences." "That's exactly what it does," Marcus agreed. "And that's exactly why it's so important." Empress Cathera stood, her movement causing the other council members to immediately fall silent. "The approaching human vessels present us with a dilemma. If we allow them to leave with Prince Consort Marcus, we acknowledge that his choice was not freely made. This would invalidate the princess's selection and require her to choose again from among the approved candidates." Marcus felt Lyrelay tense beside him, her scales shifting to worried grays. "However," the Empress continued, "if we refuse to release him, we confirm human suspicions that he is being held against his will. This could lead to hostilities between our peoples that benefit no one." "There is a third option," Lyrelay said, rising from her seat. Her scales had shifted to the determined golds and silvers that Marcus had come to associate with her making important decisions. Marcus could meet with the human delegation himself, not as our prisoner, not as our hostage, but as our representative. Let him explain his choice in his own words to his own people. The council erupted in a cacophony of color and sound as every member tried to speak at once. The idea of allowing a newly bonded prince consort to leave the palace, to speak freely with representatives of his original allegiance, was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. "Absolutely not," Admiral Korath declared. "The security risks alone are manageable," Lyrelay interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of her royal birth. "Marcus will be accompanied by an appropriate guard detail. The meeting will take place in neutral space, monitored by both sides. If he chooses to leave with the human delegation, he will be free to do so." Marcus stared at her in shock. She was offering him an escape, a way out of the impossible situation that her choice had created. After everything that had happened, after the bond they had formed, she was giving him the option to walk away. "And if I choose to return?" he asked quietly. Lyrelay met his eyes, her scales showing colors he couldn't read. "Then you will have proven to both our peoples that your choice was made freely, that what exists between us is real, not political manipulation or romantic delusion." Empress Cathara remained silent for a long moment, her massive brain processing implications and possibilities at speeds that made human thought look glacial. Finally, she nodded slowly. "It will be done. Prepare a diplomatic vessel. Prince Consort Marcus will meet with the human delegation in neutral space. Admiral Korath, you will command the escort fleet. Chancellor Vorthak, you will draft the formal protocols for this unprecedented situation." As the council members dispersed to carry out their orders, Marcus found himself alone with Lyrelay in the vast chamber. The princess had moved to one of the observation windows, staring out at the alien stars that painted the sky in colors Earth's sun had never dreamed of. "You didn't have to do that," Marcus said, joining her at the window. "You didn't have to give me a way out." "Yes, I did," she replied without turning around. "Because if I hadn't, you would never truly know if your choice was free. And neither would I." Marcus reached out, gently touching her scaled hand with his human fingers. The contact sent a small electric thrill through him, a reminder of how different they were and how miraculous it was that they had found each other across the vast emptiness of space. "What if I choose to leave?" he asked. Now she did turn, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight in ways that made them seem to glow from within. "Then I will know that what I felt was real, even if it wasn't shared. And I will remember that for once in my life, I chose with my heart instead of my mind. And what if I choose to stay?" Lyralay's scales shifted to the warm golds of happiness, mixed with the deep blues of perfect certainty. "Then we will face whatever comes next together, as partners, as equals. As two beings who chose each other against all odds and all expectations." Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them without need for words. Tomorrow he would board a ship that would carry him toward the most important decision of his life. He would face his former colleagues, his military superiors, possibly even representatives from Earth's government. He would have to explain the impossible, justify the unprecedented, and choose between the world he had known and the future he had never imagined. But tonight, standing in the starlight with an alien princess whose love had already changed the course of galactic history, Marcus Chen felt ready for anything the universe wanted to throw at him. After all, he had already done the impossible once. Tomorrow, he would find out if he could do it again. The neutral meeting point was a space station that had been abandoned for centuries, its ancient bulk rotating slowly against the star field like a monument to forgotten ambitions. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the Zalarian diplomatic vessel, watching as 3 Earth Defense Corps ships took position around the station. Even at this distance, he could see the weapon systems tracking his ship with mechanical precision. Admiral Korath stood beside him, her scales showing the controlled aggression of a predator waiting to strike. "Your people are nervous," she observed. "Their formations suggest they expect treachery." "They're scared," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. Scared people can be reasoned with. Treacherous people can't." The Admiral's scales shifted to curious purples. "You speak of your own species as if you no longer belong to them." It was a statement, not a question, and Marcus found himself considering the implications. 3 weeks ago, he would have bristled at the suggestion that he was anything other than human. Now, wearing the formal robes of a Zalarian prince consort, surrounded by alien technology that made human science look primitive, he wasn't entirely sure what he was anymore. "I'm still human," he said finally. "But I'm something else too. Something new." Princess Lyralay entered the observation deck, her scales displaying the formal blues and silvers of diplomatic ceremony. She had insisted on accompanying the delegation, despite the obvious security risks. Looking at her now, Marcus was struck again by her courage. She was risking her life on the possibility that love could bridge the gap between species. "The human delegation has docked," she reported. "They're requesting immediate transfer to the station's conference facility." Marcus nodded, running through the conversation he was about to have in his mind for the 100th time. "How did you explain to your former commanding officers that you had fallen in love with an alien princess? How did you convince them that your decision to join the Zalarian royal family was based on genuine emotion rather than coercion or Stockholm Syndrome? More importantly, how did you convince yourself?" The abandoned station's conference room was a neutral gray space that had been hastily cleared and pressurized for the meeting. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across walls that had once housed the dreams of some long-dead civilization. It was, Marcus reflected, an appropriately dramatic setting for what might be the most important conversation in human history. The human delegation was exactly what he had expected. Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was a woman in her 50s who had earned her rank through a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute dedication to humanity's survival. Colonel James Rodriguez had been Marcus's commanding officer before the diplomatic mission, a man who understood the weight of impossible decisions. Dr. Elena Vasquez was Earth's leading xenobiologist, brought along to assess whether Marcus was still mentally and physically human. They sat across the table from Marcus and Lyrale like judges preparing to deliver a verdict. The princess had chosen to attend in her full royal regalia, her scales displaying formal patterns that spoke of authority and dignity. Marcus wore the simple dress uniform of an Earth Defense Corps captain, a choice that had raised eyebrows among the Zalarian delegation, but which he felt was necessary. "Captain Chen," Admiral Sarah Chen began, her voice carrying the weight of military protocol, "are you currently under any form of coercion, drug influence, or mental manipulation?" "No, Admiral," Marcus replied. "I am here of my own free will." Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered face showing the strain of the past few weeks. "Marcus, help me understand this. 3 months ago, you were one of our best officers, level-headed, rational, dedicated to the mission. Now we're told you've married an alien princess and become royalty in an empire that could crush Earth without breaking stride. What the hell happened?" Marcus had expected the question, but hearing it spoken aloud still hit him like a physical blow. What had happened? How did you explain the inexplicable? "I met someone," he said simply. "Someone who changed everything." Dr. Vasquez activated a small scanning device, its sensors focused on Marcus. "Captain, I'm reading elevated levels of several neurotransmitters associated with pair bonding and emotional attachment. There's also evidence of minor genetic modifications that are consistent with exposure to Zalarian biotechnology." Marcus felt Lyrale tense beside him, her scales shifting to defensive patterns. The modifications were part of the bonding process, minor changes that would allow them to share certain emotional states and physical sensations. It was the Zalarian equivalent of wedding rings, a permanent symbol of commitment. "Are you suggesting I've been altered against my will, Doctor?" Marcus asked. "I'm suggesting that you may not be entirely human anymore," Vasquez replied bluntly. "The changes are subtle, but they're there. It's possible that your decision-making processes have been compromised." Admiral Chen raised a hand, forestalling any response. "Captain Chen, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you want to come home? Do you want to return to Earth with us right now?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus looked around the gray conference room, at the faces of people who had been his colleagues, his friends, his connection to everything he had ever known. Then he looked at Lyrale, whose scales were carefully neutral, but whose eyes held a universe of hope and fear. "I want to tell you a story," Marcus said finally, "about a soldier who spent his whole life following orders, doing his duty, serving something larger than himself, and about a princess who spent her whole life having her choices made for her, having her future decided by political necessity and genetic compatibility." He stood, moving to the room's single viewport, where the stars wheeled slowly in the eternal darkness. 3 months ago, that soldier and that princess met each other. And for the first time in either of their lives, they had the chance to choose something for themselves. Not because it was politically advantageous, not because it was militarily sound, not because it made rational sense, but because it felt right. Colonel Rodriguez shook his head. "Marcus, feelings aren't strategy. Emotions don't determine policy. You can't base life-changing decisions on love," Marcus interrupted, turning back to face the table. "Why not? What's the point of all the strategy and policy and rational decision-making if it doesn't lead to something worth having?" "Because love fades," Admiral Chen said quietly. "Passion burns out. What happens when the novelty wears off and you're stuck in an alien empire, cut off from your own species, Married to someone you can barely understand. It was the fear Marcus had been wrestling with since the day Lyrelei had pointed at him in the throne room. What if this was just exotic attraction? What if the differences that seemed so exciting now became insurmountable obstacles later? What if he was making the biggest mistake in human history? Admiral, Lyrelei spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Zalarian speech so distinctive. May I ask you a question? Admiral Chen nodded cautiously. Do you have a mate, a spouse, as humans call them? I do. And when you chose them, was it a rational decision based on genetic compatibility and political advantage? Or did you choose them because they made you feel things you couldn't explain? The Admiral's expression softened slightly. That's different. We're the same species. Are you? Lyrelei asked. Marcus has told me about human diversity, about different cultures, different languages, different ways of understanding the world, about wars fought between humans who could barely comprehend each other's motivations. If love can bridge those gaps, why not the gap between our species? Dr. Vasquez looked up from her scanner, frowning. The genetic modifications aren't just superficial. Captain Chen's brain chemistry has been altered in ways that could affect his judgment permanently. The same way any long-term relationship alters brain chemistry, Marcus replied. The same way love changes people, makes them better versions of themselves. Yes, I'm different than I was 3 months ago. I'm happier. I'm more complete. I found something worth fighting for that goes beyond duty or species loyalty. Colonel Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the calculating gaze of a man trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Let's say you're right. Let's say this is real love, not manipulation or coercion. What happens to humanity? What happens to Earth? What do you mean? I mean you're not just any officer, Marcus. You're Captain Marcus Chen, hero of the Battle of Proxima Station, the man who single-handedly prevented a catastrophic reactor breach that would have killed 10,000 colonists. You're a symbol. And now you're telling us that symbol belongs to an alien empire. Marcus felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders like a familiar burden. He had never asked to be a hero, had never wanted the responsibility that came with public recognition. But Rodriguez was right. His decision would send a message to every human in the galaxy. Maybe that's exactly the message we need to send, Marcus said. Maybe it's time for humanity to stop thinking of ourselves as alone in the universe. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what we could become if we opened ourselves to possibilities beyond our own species. Pretty words, Admiral Chen said. But the reality is that you're asking us to trust the future of humanity to an alien empire based on your personal feelings for one individual. No, Marcus replied. I'm asking you to trust that love, real love, doesn't recognize species boundaries. I'm asking you to believe that the bond between Lyrelei and me is strong enough to serve as a bridge between our peoples. He moved back to the table, placing his hands flat on its surface as he looked each human delegation member in the eyes. I'm asking you to have faith that sometimes the impossible choice is the right choice. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Marcus could hear the ambient hum of the station's life support systems, the distant vibration of the docked ships, the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. Everything he was, everything he had ever been, hung in the balance of this moment. Finally, Admiral Chen spoke. If we let you stay, if we accept this arrangement, what guarantee do we have that you'll remember your loyalty to humanity? The same guarantee you have with anyone, Marcus replied. My word. And if there's a conflict between human and Zalarian interests, if war comes between our peoples, what then? Marcus looked at Lyrelei, saw his own determination reflected in her alien features. Then we'll work to prevent it. That's what partners do. They find solutions that serve both their interests. Dr. Vasquez deactivated her scanner, her expression thoughtful. The genetic modifications are irreversible. If you change your mind later, if you want to come back to Earth, you'll never be completely human again. I'm already not completely human anymore, Marcus said. I'm something new. Something that couldn't exist without both species. Maybe that's what the universe needs, bridges between worlds, connections that transcend the accidents of biology. Colonel Rodriguez stood, extending his hand across the table. You always were too stubborn for your own good, Marcus. If this is what you want, if this is really your choice, then I wish you the best of luck. Marcus shook his former commander's hand, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Thank you, sir. Admiral Chen rose as well, her military bearing intact despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. Captain Chen, by the authority vested in me by the Earth Defense Corps and the Unified Earth Government, I hereby accept your resignation from active duty and recognize your new status as a diplomatic representative of humanity within the Zalarian Empire. The formal words carried the weight of finality, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. Marcus felt a chapter of his existence closing even as a new one opened. There is one more thing, Lyra Lai said, standing gracefully. A message from my mother, Empress Kithara, to the leadership of Earth. She activated a holographic projector, and the conference room filled with the imposing presence of the Zalarian ruler. Even in recorded form, the Empress radiated power and authority that made the station's emergency lighting seem bright by comparison. Leaders of Earth, the Empress's voice resonated through the chamber. The choice made by my daughter and your Captain Chen represents a new possibility in galactic relations. We propose a formal alliance between our peoples, not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals exploring the universe together. The implications hit the human delegation like a physical force. An alliance with the Zalarian Empire would transform humanity's position in the galaxy overnight. Access to technology that could revolutionize human civilization, protection from hostile species, opportunities for expansion and exploration beyond anything they had ever imagined. The bond between Princess Lyra Lai and Prince Consort Marcus will serve as the foundation for this alliance, the Empress continued. Their children, when they come, will be living symbols of cooperation between our species. This is our offer, made freely and without coercion. The message ended, leaving the humans staring at each other in stunned silence. What had begun as a rescue mission had become an opportunity that could reshape the future of both species. Admiral Chen was the first to recover. Captain Chen, Prince Consort Marcus, are you prepared to serve as humanity's representative in these negotiations? Marcus looked at Lyra, saw the trust and love in her alien eyes, felt the weight of responsibility settling around him like a mantle of starlight. Yes, Admiral, I am. As the human delegation prepared to return to their ships, carrying news that would transform Earth's understanding of its place in the universe, Marcus stood with Lirelai at the viewport, watching the stars wheel in their ancient patterns. Somewhere out there was Earth, the world of his birth, the home he would always carry in his heart. And somewhere else was Zelaria, the world of his choice, the home he was building with his own hands. Are you ready for this? Lyrelai asked, her scales showing the warm colors of contentment mixed with anticipation. Marcus took her scaled hand in his human one, marveling again at how perfectly they fit together despite every biological reason they shouldn't. I don't think anyone could be ready for what comes next, but I'm willing to try. Together they walked toward the docking bay, where the Zalarian diplomatic vessel waited to carry them back to the Empire. Behind them, human ships prepared to jump back to Earth with news that would change everything. Ahead of them lay a future that no one could predict, full of challenges that no one had ever faced, requiring solutions that no one had ever imagined. But they would face it together, a human and a Zalarian, proving that love could indeed bridge the gap between species. And perhaps, in time, their example would light the way for others to follow, building bridges of understanding across the vast emptiness of space until the universe itself became a little less lonely. In the end, Marcus reflected, that might be the most human thing of all, refusing to accept that anything was impossible, especially when it came to love.